Welcome, restless dreamer. You've just stepped into the shadows of sleep, where stories whisper and the darkness listens. I'm your guide tonight, your voice in the void, here to lead you gently into nightmares wrapped in lullabies. Before we begin, press like if you're brave enough, and subscribe for more midnight tales that blur the line between sleep and terror. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what hour has found you? I never thought I could enjoy being completely alone, but when the opportunity came to stay at my uncle's cabin deep in the Appalachians, I jumped at it. No family, no friends, no distractions, just me, a small creaking cabin, and the dense woods pressing in on all sides. The road up to the place wound through ridges thick with trees, where sunlight barely touched the ground, filtering down in lazy, shifting beams. Parking my truck near the porch, I felt the world change the moment I stepped out. The air was heavier, sharper, like the forest was holding its breath, waiting. The cabin itself was simple: weathered wood walls, a small stove for heating and cooking, and a porch that creaked under even the slightest weight. I carried in my groceries, cans of chili, soup, some ground beef, instant mac and cheese, and stacked firewood neatly beside the stove, coffee mugs on the counter, a book near the window, a few things unpacked to make it feel like home. It felt surreal, peaceful. I could hear the faint groan of the floorboards, the settling of old wood, the small tick of a clock near the door. Nothing else. That first night, I made coffee the old-fashioned way, boiling water over the stove, letting the aroma fill the room. Sitting by the window, I watched shadows stretch across the porch. The silence wrapped around me like a soft blanket. I told myself I was exactly where I wanted to be, that solitude could be a kind of luxury. I drifted to sleep easily, thinking the only sound I'd hear would be my own breathing. But the second night, everything changed. I was hunched over a steaming pot of chili in the kitchen, stirring absent-mindedly when I heard it. A slow, deliberate step on the porch. My heart skipped. The cabin had one specific plank that groaned loudly under weight, a sound I knew from childhood visits. No one could cross it without making that groan. I froze, spoon in hand. Then another step, slow and measured, and then silence. I edged over to the window. Moonlight slanted in across the porch, revealing only the empty rocking chair, stacked firewood and cooler. Nothing moved. I forced a laugh at myself, blaming raccoons, the wind, or the settling wood. But then it happened again. A longer, deeper creak, as if someone was shifting weight carefully. Panic rose like bile in my throat. I grabbed the doorknob and yanked it open. Still nothing. The porch lay empty. That's when my eyes landed on the deadbolt. Half turned. Not locked, not open. I'd checked it before bed. I was obsessive about locks. My stomach dropped. I slammed it shut, twisted the bolt hard, and wedged a chair under the doorknob. My mind raced. Old wood? Imagination? Maybe. But it didn't matter. I couldn't sleep. I stayed upright in the kitchen, flashlight in hand, listening. Every creak, every shift of wind felt amplified. Around midnight, I finally dragged myself to the bedroom, blanket pulled tight over me, flashlight close. Then came the scraping. Low, deliberate, like metal dragged across the wood floor. It circled the cabin, moving from wall to wall, faint but unmistakable. I clicked on the flashlight, scanning every window, the porch, the door. Nothing. No shadow. No animal. Only the scraping, slow and purposeful, circling the cabin again and again. Then the knocks. Short, sharp, measured. Knock, knock, knock. At the back door. My chest rattled as I pinned myself to the wall, flashlight shaking in my hands. I waited, held my breath, but nothing followed. No more knocks. No more scraping. I stayed like that until the first hint of light. Morning came, and I stepped outside cautiously. My heart sank. Bootprints, circling the cabin in intricate patterns I couldn't understand. Not sharp, not old, but fresh. Whoever had done this had been inside during the night, and the way they moved, It wasn't random. Spirals, loops, careful curves. Someone either knew the cabin intimately or felt their way around in the dark. Either way, it was deliberate. I didn't eat. I didn't pack neatly. I flung clothes into my bag, left the leftover chili in the pot, and grabbed my essentials. Every half-mile down the mountain, I glanced over my shoulder, expecting someone to be standing at the tree line. The drive felt endless, every bend like a trap. When my phone finally caught a signal, I called my uncle, told him I was heading home early. I didn't give a reason, didn't need to. I never went back. Even after leaving the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't let me go. Every shadow along the highway, every rustle in the trees, made my stomach tighten. I stayed with a friend in town, hoping that the warmth of another human being and the hum of electricity would chase the fear away. But sleep didn't come easily. Every settling creak of her house reminded me of the scraping along my own cabin walls, the deliberate taps, the boot prints circling the cabin in impossible patterns. The first night in town, I kept checking doors, windows, even cupboards. Each time I closed my eyes, I imagined the spirals of footprints, the slow, methodical movements of whoever or whatever had entered the cabin. Around midnight, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. My hand shook as I picked it up. The message was simple. You left too soon. I stared at the screen, unable to breathe. There was no area code I recognized. I tried calling back, but it went straight to silence. The shadows of my friend's living room seemed to pulse with every blink. I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the night over and over. The scraping, the knocking, the meticulous boot prints. The fear was no longer confined to memory. It was alive, crawling along my spine, whispering that it hadn't finished with me. I decided I needed answers. I had to see the cabin again to understand what had happened. Maybe if I confronted it, the fear would lose its grip. I drove back up the winding mountain road, every mile a slow torture. The ridges and dense woods pressed in as though they remembered me, like the forest itself knew what I feared. When I reached the clearing, the cabin sat peacefully under the morning sun. From a distance, nothing seemed wrong. No footprints, no disturbances. The porch looked as it had always looked in my memory, but the moment I stepped closer, I felt the weight again, the same oppressive, watchful presence from before. My stomach twisted. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and cold earth. Dust had settled on surfaces, yet the cabin felt different, alive, waiting. I checked the floor, the walls, every lock, every window. Nothing was broken. Nothing had moved. Yet the energy in the room pressed against me, heavy, impossible to ignore. I approached the area where the boot prints had been, inspecting the floor closely. And then I noticed it, a faint spiral scratched into the wooden floorboards near the stove. Fresh, shallow, deliberate. The lines curved into loops, mimicking the patterns I had seen outside. My hands shook. Whoever, or whatever, was here again, and it had been inside while I thought I was safe. Night fell quickly in the mountains. I stayed in the cabin, flashlight in hand, listening. Tap, tap, scrape, knock. The sounds returned, but softer, almost teasing. I felt its presence circling me, aware of every step, every breath. It didn't hide. It toyed with me, testing the edges of my courage. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, but I forced myself to stay. I had to see it. And then I saw it. Not a person, not anything solid. Just shadows shifting against the walls, dark swirls moving impossibly against the grain of the wood. I blinked. When I looked again, the shadows had formed a spiral pattern on the floor, echoing the boot prints outside, the scratches near the stove. I realized then that the entity wasn't bound by walls or doors. It was the cabin itself, the space around it, alive and watching, marking its territory, reminding me that I was a guest in a place that didn't belong to me. Fear clawed at me, but a deeper understanding followed. The cabin had chosen me, or perhaps it had always known I would come here alone. The spirals were a language, deliberate, patient, impossible to fully comprehend, and it wanted me to see, to understand the rules I had ignored by seeking solitude. I packed my things that night, leaving nothing behind but the faint impression of my presence. I drove down the winding road, careful to glance back. The tree line seemed to ripple in the moonlight, shadows twisting into spirals that dissolved when I blinked. When I reached the last ridge, the forest seemed to sigh, settling again into silence. I never returned to the cabin. I don't plan to. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I feel the spirals in the shadows, circling me. I hear faint scratches on walls, taps at windows, reminders that solitude comes with a cost. The cabin didn't just exist in the mountains. It followed me, in whispers and shadows, a presence I couldn't leave behind. And I've realized the hardest truth. It doesn't matter how far I go. The cabin, the spirals, the deliberate watchfulness, it waits. Patient, silent, always marking the boundaries, always reminding me that I was never truly alone. I never imagined that solitude could feel so heavy, like it pressed against your chest with every quiet breath. When my family left for that weekend wedding in Westmore, Tennessee, I was supposed to be relieved. Most people would dread staying alone in a house tucked away at the end of a winding gravel road. But I thought it would be blissful. Just me, the trees, and the kind of silence you can only find far from the world. The drive up to our house always had that edge of suspense. Narrow bridges, loose gravel, and the way the road curved sharply through the Appalachian hills made me grip the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. Once I passed the last house at the bottom of the hill, an abandoned, ivy-choked structure that had been empty for decades, the world behind me disappeared. Up here it was only the woods, the wind, and our little clearing where our house sat like a forgotten relic. I waved at their car as it disappeared down the drive and immediately felt a wave of satisfaction. No awkward conversations, no forced smiles, no small talk, just peace. I kicked off my shoes, tossed a frozen pizza into the oven, and flopped onto the couch. My plan was simple. Binge old shows, eat junk food, and do nothing for hours on end. The first few hours were exactly that. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the floorboards, and the distant call of a bird or an owl outside were the only sounds. I felt the kind of comfort that comes from being utterly alone. But then came the tapping. It started softly, sharp but deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, half asleep, convinced it was a branch brushing the window, the result of some trick of the wind. But the sound repeated, tap, tap, at the same rhythm, from the same spot on the living room window. My heart picked up, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a squirrel, maybe a loose shutter. The rational part of my brain clung to that hope. After a minute of staring at the flickering TV, I muted it and held my breath. The house felt unnaturally silent. No crickets, no hum of the heating vent, nothing but my own shallow breathing. I crept to the window and flipped on the porch light. Empty. The yard, the clearing, even the edges of the woods were still. Nothing stirred. I checked the locks on the front and side doors. Solid, nothing out of place. Yet the feeling of being watched pressed against me like a second skin. I retreated to my bedroom, dragging a flashlight with me and locking the door. Curling up under the covers, I tried to convince myself that it was over, that the sound had been nothing. Sleep came, but fitfully, punctuated by every creak and whisper of the house settling around me. The next day, I tried to settle into normalcy. I left lights on, read a book instead of watching TV, and made tea to keep my hands busy. But the quiet carried a tension I couldn't shake. Around midnight, the tapping returned, but this time it wasn't at the window. It came from below, the crawl space that ran under the house. Thud, 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 slow, steady, deliberate. My blood ran cold. The space was only tall enough to crawl through, accessible by a small hatch behind the porch steps, normally secured with a padlock. I didn't dare open it, but the sound persisted, rhythmic and measured, Like whatever was down there knew exactly how to make its presence felt without being seen. When I finally worked up the courage to step outside, the hatch told me everything I needed to know. The padlock was still there, dangling innocuously, but the securing bolt was gone. The dirt around it looked disturbed, but not trampled, carefully walked over, like someone knew how to leave no evidence behind. I backed away slowly, heart hammering, and returned to the house. I locked the doors, dragged a chair under the bedroom doorknob, and stayed pressed against the wall with my knife in hand until daylight. By Sunday, exhaustion and nerves had made my hands shake. I attempted breakfast, tried to convince myself it was my imagination, but then the tapping began again. From every window in succession, moving through the house like a slow, deliberate message. Tap, 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 tap. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe too loudly. My eyes were fixed on the floor as the sound circled the rooms. Then came the knocking. 4 heavy, deliberate knocks on the bedroom window. Unlike the tapping, these weren't a game. They were a statement. I knew where you were. I curled up against the wall, knife pressed to my chest, too terrified to even whisper. And then, silence. When I awoke, daylight filtered through the blinds. The house was empty, yet the evidence of intrusion remained. Smudges at every window, warped metal on the crawlspace hatch. It was like the house had been breached without breaking a single lock. My haven had been violated, every shadow a potential threat, and I knew I couldn't stay. By noon I packed a bag, left a note, and drove down the winding gravel road, my eyes darting to every shadow along the tree line. I didn't look back. Even after leaving, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped. Every shadow in town, every flicker of movement on the road, made my stomach tighten. I stayed with Belle, one of my closest friends, who lived about an hour away, but sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of her old house, every groan of the settling walls, reminded me of the taps, the thuds, the knowing knocks in my own home. My family returned the next day, oblivious to what had happened, chattering about weddings and distant cousins. I didn't correct them. I didn't want anyone to know just how close I had come to something I couldn't even name. The first night in Belle's house, I tried to read to distract myself, but around midnight, my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "Did you miss me?" My hands went numb, heart leaping into my throat. It had to be a prank, right? But the number wasn't local. It had an area code from a county I didn't even know existed. I tried calling it back, but the line went dead before it even rang. Sleep came in fitful bursts. In my dreams, the tapping returned, but this time, it wasn't on windows or doors. It was inside me, inside my skull. Tap, tap, tap. I would wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I heard it echoing through the walls of Belle's quiet house. I began checking doors, windows, every lock, even the back of my closet. Nothing. Everything was secure, and yet, the feeling never left. By the 3rd day, I decided I had to face it. I had to know what had been in that house. So I drove back up the winding gravel road. My stomach turned as I passed the abandoned house at the bottom of the hill, and I forced my eyes forward. Up the incline, past the narrow bridges, the trees thickening on either side, I finally reached the clearing. Our house sat there, deceptively calm. Nothing appeared out of place from the outside. The windows reflected the sun, the porch steps were clean, and the hatch to the crawl space was still locked. Inside, the house smelled faintly of the woods, damp and cold. Dust had collected on surfaces I hadn't touched in days. But there was a subtle difference, a quiet sense of expectation, like the house itself was holding its breath. I checked the locks, each one secure, the windows all intact. But when I reached the crawlspace hatch, I noticed the latch, bent, just slightly, as if someone had gripped it and twisted until the metal protested. I knelt, running my fingers along the warped metal. It wasn't just old rust. I could feel the fingerprints, faint but unmistakable. Someone had been down there again. But who? Or what? A shiver ran down my spine as I realized I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. The sun dipped below the trees, and I decided to stay the night, refusing to let fear win. I made dinner, keeping my back to the windows, every shadow feeling alive. As night fell, the tapping began again. Tap, 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 from the living room. I gripped a kitchen knife and moved slowly, counting my steps. Tap, tap, tap. It circled the house, moving from window to window, as if measuring me, testing boundaries. I pressed myself against the wall, eyes wide, ears straining for any sound beyond the rhythm. Then came the knocks. 4 heavy, deliberate hits at the bedroom window, the same as before. But this time, I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The air seemed to thicken around me, the shadows stretching unnaturally. And then I heard it, a faint whisper, almost inside my own head. Why did you leave? My vision blurred with panic. I stumbled backward, tripping over a rug, knife falling from my hands. The whispers grew, overlapping, layering into dozens of voices, low and angry. You can't escape. You never could. I ran from the room, bursting into the living room, and froze. The lights flickered, pulsing like a heartbeat. Shadows moved along the walls, stretching, writhing, not cast by anything solid. The taps continued in rhythm, now accompanied by soft scratching from the crawl space below. I understood then. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even a creature in the traditional sense. It was something older, something patient, something that had been waiting for me to be alone. I grabbed my bag, throwing essentials inside, and ran to the car. The trees seemed to lean closer, the branches clawing at the windshield. My vision tunneled as I sped down the gravel incline, barely noticing the sharp curves or the narrow bridges. The tapping in my head didn't stop until I passed the last house at the bottom of the hill. Only then did it fade into a distant echo, leaving me shaking, breathless, and hollowed out. I haven't returned since. I can't. Every night I check my locks, my windows, every shadow in my home, expecting the taps to resume. And I know deep down that one day they will. Because the thing that watched me in that house, that circled me, that bent metal with its unseen hands, it doesn't forgive, it doesn't leave, and it doesn't forget. I thought being alone at the cabin would be peaceful. My parents had headed into town for supplies, probably not coming back until late evening. With the winding mountain roads, their tendency to linger in every store, and Dad chatting with every stranger he passed, evening could easily stretch into nightfall. I didn't mind. Solitude was something I had learned to enjoy, especially in our family cabin deep in the Appalachian hills. The cabin sat at the point where the gravel road faded into thick forest, almost as if the trees themselves were closing off the world beyond. There was no cell signal, no neighbors, barely any traffic. The stillness was so complete that I could hear my own blood rushing if I stood still long enough. It wasn't eerie, just normal for me. I stretched out on the old couch with a fuzzy blanket over my legs, a lukewarm cup of tea on the coffee table, and a book resting loosely in my hands. The refrigerator hummed in the corner, and the wall clock ticked steadily. For a moment, it was perfect. Then came the sound. Scrape, faint, like metal against wood. My heart skipped. I froze, trying to convince myself it was just a branch brushing the siding or the old cabin timber settling. But the noise repeated, longer this time, deliberate. I dropped the book and stood, muscles tight, eyes scanning the pale light filtering through the back door. The old brass handle rattled softly, shifting in its frame. Someone was testing it. My hands shook as I remembered the deadbolt. I always locked it, always followed the rules my parents drilled into me. I hadn't today. Fingers fumbling, I slid the bolt into place. Click. The sound echoed too loudly in the small cabin. Nothing followed. The scrape had stopped. I tried to calm myself, sitting back on the couch, muscles taut, senses alert. My tea had gone cold. Forgotten. Then a shadow passed across the back porch, brief but clear. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, but it came again. Someone, or something, was standing at the window. No knock, no voice, just presence. I crawled low behind the armrest, heart hammering, back pressed against the wall. Every groan of the porch boards made me flinch. Slow, careful steps moved across the porch. The figure stopped at the front door. I heard the knob turn softly, then again harder. It didn't open. Then, tap, 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 fingernails dragging across glass. Slow, intentional. I froze, paralyzed, then crept toward the hallway where the landline hung. Relief surged at the dial tone. I didn't dare hope it still worked. My parents weren't answering. I tried the sheriff, dialing with trembling hands. The line rang, no answer. Then I heard it. Steps above me. Slow, uneven, deliberate. Footfalls across the upstairs floor, the part of the cabin we rarely used. Storage, a spare bed, untouched for months. My stomach twisted as the sound continued, echoing through the ceiling. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe loudly. I set the phone down gently. Adrenaline kicked in. I bolted to the kitchen, fumbling with the deadbolt on the front door, my hands slick with sweat. Finally, it gave way. I shoved it open and ran into the dark forest, branches clawing at my arms, roots and rocks threatening to trip me. I didn't stop until the cabin light sank behind me and the trees loomed dark and silent. I crouched at the edge of the clearing, breath ragged, chest pounding. Then I saw him. The man stepped from the cabin's shadow. Broad shoulders, shaved head, heavy jacket zipped to his chin. He didn't speak. He scanned the clearing slowly, deliberately. Then he began circling the cabin, methodical, purposeful. No hesitation, no wasted motion. He knew exactly what he was doing. I stayed hidden until he slipped into the woods behind the cabin. When I finally dared to move, the adrenaline still racing, I sprinted down the gravel road. My legs burned, but I didn't stop. Headlights rounded the bend, and a truck slowed. The driver leaned over, eyes wide, and wordlessly opened the door. I climbed in, panting, shaking, too terrified to explain. He just nodded and sped toward the sheriff's office. When we arrived, I called my parents again. This time they answered, already panicked. Deputies moved fast. Less than an hour later, they were at the cabin with me. An upstairs window frame was splintered, the latch forced. Whoever had been inside had watched me, tested me, waited. That sound, the creaking above, the slow steps on the floor no one used, never left me. I never spent another night there alone. Even after leaving the cabin, I couldn't shake the memory of that night. The image of the man circling the house haunted every quiet moment. Every creak of a floorboard in my own home made me flinch. The sheriff assured me they would investigate, but the woods were vast, the cabin remote, and there was no trace of him beyond the splintered window. Whoever he was, he knew the terrain, he knew the cabin, and he had chosen me. A few days later, I convinced my parents to return to the cabin with me, just to retrieve some personal things. The drive up the mountain felt different this time. The trees seemed to lean closer, the shadows deeper. My stomach churned with a mix of anxiety and determination. I had to face the place, if only to reclaim a sense of control. The cabin looked the same from the outside, quiet and unassuming. But the moment I stepped onto the porch, a wave of unease rolled over me. The broken window had been boarded up, but the boards looked hastily nailed. Inside, everything felt wrong. The air was heavier, as if it remembered the intrusion. I could feel eyes on me, even though no one was there. I moved cautiously through the rooms, picking up my scattered belongings. Every sound seemed amplified. The fridge's hum, the ticking of the clock, the creak of a floorboard I swore had never groaned before. My parents chatted nervously, trying to lighten the mood, but even their voices couldn't dispel the tension that clung to the cabin walls. Then I heard it, a slow, deliberate knock, not at the door, not even near the windows. It came from the corner of the living room, the shadowed area behind the couch where the light barely reached. My heart stopped. I froze, gripping the edge of the table. My parents didn't hear it. I didn't want them to. My instincts screamed that whatever was here wasn't human, or at least, it wasn't ordinary. I crept closer, every step measured, eyes darting to the corners of the room. Nothing, just shadows and the faint hum of the refrigerator. But when I glanced down at the floor, I saw it. A boot print. Not old, not faded, fresh, leading from the corner of the room toward the stairwell. My pulse spiked. I knew I hadn't walked there, and my parents hadn't been inside that area yet. "Did you see that?" I whispered, barely audible. My parents turned, confused. "See what?" my dad asked. I shook my head, forcing myself to breathe. "Nothing. Just, let's grab our stuff and go." We packed quickly, the cabin feeling heavier with every passing minute. My hands shook as I lifted my bag, throwing in clothes, books, anything I could grab. I didn't want to look around, didn't want to see more evidence that someone, or something, had been inside while I thought I was safe. Then I heard footsteps upstairs, slow, measured, the kind that made the floorboards groan under deliberate weight. My stomach dropped. I spun toward the stairwell, but no one appeared. The echo of the steps faded, leaving a silence so complete it pressed against my ears. I grabbed my parents' hands. "Go, now!" We didn't linger. Outside, the forest seemed to close in, but the fresh air was a relief. The cabin loomed behind us, quiet, but I could swear it was watching. I glanced back and saw a shadow move past the upstairs window, subtle, almost blending with the darkness. My throat tightened. I didn't scream. I didn't say anything. I just ran, dragging my parents along, until we reached the gravel road and the safety of our truck. The sheriff's deputies examined the cabin again the following day. They found footprints, small, deliberate, weaving through the rooms, circling the main floor in patterns that made no sense. No fingerprints, no other trace. Just boots and the knowledge that someone had been inside without leaving a typical trail. I told them about the knocks, the steps, the shadow at the window. They listened politely, but exchanged concerned looks. The woods were old and wild. Intruders could vanish easily, but their skepticism didn't erase the fear I carried. Weeks passed. I tried to return to normal life, but the memory of that night clung to me. Every rustle in the trees, every creak in the floor, made my stomach tighten. Sleep was difficult. I slept with a lamp on, doors locked, a baseball bat within reach. My friends didn't understand. They called it paranoia, but it wasn't paranoia. I had seen him, felt him, heard him, and I knew the cabin wasn't safe, not for me. One evening I received a text from an unknown number. "We're still watching." My hands froze. The screen glowed in the dark bedroom, illuminating the familiar tree line from my window. I didn't respond. I didn't want to. My parents were furious, worried. The sheriff said there was nothing they could trace. No phone signal, no origin, nothing. But the message confirmed my deepest fear. The man knew more than he should. He knew I feared being alone, and he had found me again. Even miles from the cabin, I never returned there alone. I haven't gone back at all since. Friends joke about haunted cabins, wild stories of the Appalachian woods. But I know the truth. Whoever or whatever was in that cabin that night, it wasn't just someone trespassing. It was deliberate, calculated, and they were patient. They knew the terrain, knew the house, knew me. Now, even when I'm in crowded rooms, the quiet places unsettle me. I jump at small sounds. Shadows linger too long. I lock every door, every window, double-checking even when someone else is home. Because I know the truth. There's a part of the world that watches, waits, and it doesn't matter if you're alone in a cabin or hiding in a crowded house. Some things only need a moment to see you, to make their presence known. And that night in the Appalachian cabin, I learned just how close that world can get. I thought spending the weekend alone at my family's old cabin in Knox Hollow would be a welcome escape. My sister had a shift at the vet clinic in Shelbyville and couldn't take me along, so she dropped me off in the early afternoon, promising to be back Monday night. The cabin sat tucked into the side of a wooded hill, almost hidden unless you knew the gravel path leading up to it. The forest was dense, almost suffocating, with shadows twisting under the tall, thick trees. Sunlight barely touched the ground, and the deeper I walked, the more it felt like the woods themselves were watching. Inside, the cabin was sparse but cozy. 2 twin beds, a worn couch, a small wood stove that hadn't worked in years, and shelves of dusty cookbooks and field guides. I unpacked lightly, set my backpack down, and made some toast. The generator sputtered when I tried to start it, so I gave up and let the cabin's quiet envelope me. It was heavier than I remembered, stillness that felt almost intentional, the kind of silence where your own heartbeat sounds loud enough to make you jump. I wandered the small woods around the cabin, counted chipmunks, and tried to enjoy the peace. Night fell fast. By midnight, I was in bed, staring at the moonlight slanting through the blinds, thinking how nothing could touch me out here. But the stillness wasn't comforting. It was oppressive. At some point I heard it, a soft shuffle through the leaves outside. I cracked an eye, expecting a deer, maybe a raccoon. Nothing. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but that uneasy feeling settled in my gut. Morning brought evidence I couldn't ignore. Boot prints along the damp side of the cabin. Large, deliberate, heavier than mine, following a curved path under the bathroom window and looping toward the back. They stopped at the edge of the trees with no return trail. I circled the cabin twice, half expecting to find another set, but there was nothing. Rational thought tried to explain it. Hunters, neighbors, someone wandering by. But deep down, I knew it wasn't random. The tracks had a pattern, a precision that unsettled me more than their mere presence. I tried to focus on normal things that day. I checked windows and doors repeatedly, moved items around to feel in control, and did my best to keep busy. But the woods had gone silent in the afternoon. Not gradually, but instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. The birds, the wind, even the small hum of life, it all vanished. I stood on the porch, waiting for the natural sounds to return, but they didn't. And then came the knock. One sharp, solid hit against the back wall of the cabin. I froze, hand on the fridge, heart hammering. There was no porch back there, no steps, only bramble and mud dropping into the woods. One knock, deliberate, and nothing more. My instincts screamed to investigate, but I stayed put, unable to move. Rational thought fled. I locked every window, bolted both doors, pulled the shades, and tried to distract myself with reading, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept returning to that single, intentional knock. As night fell, I dragged the couch in front of the door, hatchet from the shed resting on my lap, candle flickering in my hand. I tried to rest, doze off, but when I woke, it was pitch black. The cabin felt smaller, the shadows stretching closer, and then I saw it. The couch had moved. Not far, just a few feet, but the drag lines in the dust were clear. My blood ran cold. No footprints, no one in sight. Only the faint movement that left the couch nudged forward. I gripped the hatchet tightly, my mind racing. I didn't sleep again that night. By morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't staying another night. I packed hurriedly, boots laced, bags stuffed with essentials. Then I saw it. A note tucked under the welcome mat. The paper was stiff, grooves pressed deep into it as if someone had written with deliberate force. The message was bizarre. Batteries, soup, duct tape, bleach, yo-yo. I read it 3 times, and each time it felt like fire in my hand. I didn't react beyond a shallow breath. I stepped back, entered the cabin once more, locked the doors again, and spent the rest of the day sitting at the kitchen table, hatchet in my lap, eyes glued to the note and the shadows. Around sunset, another knock. 2 this time, slow and deliberate, from the front door, then breathing, calm, steady, too close, too human. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. When it stopped, I checked again, note gone. Hours later, another appeared. Same paper, same handwriting. We thought you'd come sooner. By that moment, any attempt to explain it logically left me. The cabin wasn't abandoned, wasn't empty. Whatever was here knew I was alone, and it had been waiting. I didn't sleep that night. The candle flickered weakly, casting shadows that seemed to stretch and shift along the walls. I sat rigid, hatchet across my knees, listening. The cabin had fallen into a silence so complete it felt alive. Every creak of the old wood, every subtle settling of the cabin made me jump. And then I heard it, a soft scuff, deliberate, moving across the floor behind me. I froze. The sound didn't continue. It just paused, heavy, as if waiting for me to react. I gripped the hatchet tighter and turned slowly. Nothing. Only the faint gray light of early dawn creeping through the blinds. I tried to tell myself I had imagined it, but the air felt thick, watched. My heart raced. The notes, the knocks, the couch, they weren't random. Someone, or something, was testing me, observing every move, leaving messages and marks as if mapping the space, mapping me. By mid-morning, I knew I couldn't stay inside. I needed to leave, to escape, but every instinct screamed caution. I checked the doors and windows again, all locked. I glanced at the crawl space hatch behind the shed. A foot-high opening, usually insignificant. Now it looked ominous. I forced myself not to approach it. Some part of me dreaded finding nothing, as if confirming it was empty would somehow make the presence stronger. I tried to leave through the front door, boots on, bag slung over my shoulder, but my feet faltered. The cabin seemed to pulse around me. Shadows in the corners thickened, stretching into vague shapes. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rust and earth. I took a step, and the floor creaked behind me. Not an ordinary creak, but one that matched the rhythm of deliberate footsteps I'd heard the night before. My stomach churned. Outside, the forest was still. No birds, no wind, just heavy silence. The gravel path leading down the hill seemed endless, shadows stretching unnaturally across the road. My phone had no signal. Every step toward the blue rock, the only place to call, felt like moving through invisible fingers that clutched at my legs, slowing me, warning me. I didn't look back, not at first. Halfway down the path, I dared a glance. The cabin sat in the clearing, quiet, ordinary, or maybe I was imagining it. Shadows lingered under the eaves, bending in ways wood and light shouldn't bend. I tried to breathe steadily, forcing myself to focus on the rock, on reaching it. And then I saw something in the corner of my vision, a flash of movement among the trees. Not a deer, not a bird, something tall, humanoid, stepping lightly, perfectly still between the trunks. I froze, heart hammering. It didn't move toward me, didn't retreat. It just observed. I ran the last few yards to the blue rock, lungs burning, heart in my throat. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the phone. Signal. I dialed my sister. No words, just the panic in my voice. She understood immediately. "I'm coming," she said, calm but urgent. While waiting, I kept my eyes on the clearing. The cabin looked still, but I could feel it. Some presence, lingering, patient, waiting for me to falter. Then the notes started again. One floated down from an overhanging branch, folded, stiff, the same blocky handwriting. Safe enough to leave? Not yet. I dropped it, stomach churning. Minutes later, my sister appeared in her truck, headlights cutting through the dense trees. I sprinted toward her, tripping over roots, branches whipping at my face. She reached out, grabbed my arm, pulled me inside. The door slammed, engine roaring to life. For a moment I dared to glance back. The cabin was gone, or at least it looked empty now, ordinary, quiet. But I could feel it still in the pit of my stomach, in the way the shadows seemed to cling to the tree line. We didn't speak much on the drive back. No one asked questions, no explanations needed, just the quiet understanding that something had been there, something that had marked the cabin as its territory and had watched me closely, deliberately, waiting for my mistakes. I never returned to Knox Hollow. I've driven past that road, peered at the thick woods, but the cabin never appears the same way twice. Even now, months later, I can't shake it. When I'm alone at night, the memory of the knock, the shifting couch, the boot prints and the notes lingers. I catch shadows moving at the edge of my vision. The sense of being watched never truly leaves. Whatever it was at the cabin didn't just occupy that space. It followed me, quietly, in silence, spiraling in ways I can't explain, reminding me that solitude comes with a cost. I sometimes wonder if it's still there, waiting, watching, mapping the world around me, patient as ever, leaving messages for the next person foolish enough to wander alone. I'd been looking forward to a few days alone at my Uncle Ray's cabin, a stubborn little place tucked deep in the hill country near Winlow. Uncle Ray had gone into the hospital for a minor procedure, leaving me in charge. I thought it would be a quiet retreat, a chance to read, nap, and roast coffee beans over the old stove without interruption. I had been there before, but this time would be different. A full stretch of solitude. The cabin sat at the end of a winding dirt road. Once you passed the old service station, your phone signal was gone. There was no one for miles, and I liked it that way. The forest leaned in around the cabin like it wanted to swallow everything whole, thick trees blotting out the horizon. The air smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke, a scent that seemed to have soaked into the cabin over decades. I unpacked my duffel bag, left my jacket on the floor, and opened a window just enough to let the wet, earthy smell in. For a few hours the world felt perfect. By nightfall, I had burned my eggs on the wood stove and read a few chapters of a thriller I'd been dragging around for weeks. The forest hummed quietly outside. Nothing threatening, just alive. I settled on the couch, the dim light of the lamp casting long shadows across the walls. That quiet, that stillness. It was exactly what I had wanted. Then it started. A faint scrape, soft enough to ignore at first. I froze, listening. It came again, slow and deliberate, like claws dragging across the porch railing. I told myself it was a raccoon. Raccoons are persistent in the wilderness after all. But my stomach churned. The scrape came again, followed by a faint groan from the floorboards. I grabbed my flashlight and cracked the door open. The porch was empty. The forest stared at me silently, still as death. I double-checked the deadbolt, sliding it fully into place. My hands shook slightly, but I tried to laugh it off. Old cabins make noises. Wood expands and contracts. The forest wasn't watching me, I told myself. That night, I slept poorly. Every small noise startled me awake. The wind brushing against the siding, a branch snapping far off, even my own breathing. When I woke, I found the front door unlocked. My heart skipped. I always checked it before bed. I hadn't left it that way. Outside, in the soft mud near the porch, were footprints. Not mine, barefoot and flat, pressed deep into the dirt. Whoever had left them had paused at the edge of the steps, their presence lingering in the soil. My first wave of dread hit then, sharp and heavy. I didn't call anyone. There was no service, and besides, how could I explain it without sounding insane? That day, I tried to distract myself with chores. I tidied the kitchen, swept the porch, and tried to roast coffee beans again. Every sound felt amplified. The crack of a twig outside, the soft creak of the cabin settling. I told myself to focus, to stay calm. This was just a remote cabin. Nothing had happened yet. Night 3 was worse. A glass I had left on the counter the night before was now on the floor by the back door. The screen door latch, which I always hooked myself, was undone. Chairs at the table had shifted. One pointed sharply toward the window, as if observing the dark outside. I lay awake that night, eyes wide, listening. The house spoke in a language I'd never learned. Groans from the floors, the hum of the fridge, pipes tinkling, shadows shifting where the light barely reached. Around 3 a.m., I felt it. The mattress edge beside me pressed down, deliberately, like someone was settling onto it. My heart slammed in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The weight lifted after a long moment, leaving the indentation behind. I switched on the lamp. Nothing. No shadows moved. I spent the next hours searching the cabin, under beds, inside closets, even the crawl space I never opened. Empty, except the mattress. It had been warm, too warm to dismiss as imagination. My hands shook as I packed halfway, hesitating to stay one more night. The floor creaked again. Slow, deliberate, coming from the front room where the rocking chair sat by the window. It rocked gently, forward and back, though no one touched it. On the seat lay a folded flannel shirt, one I hadn't unpacked. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my keys and duffel, threw my bag in the car, and didn't even look back as I slammed the door and drove down the winding dirt road, my heart still racing from the sounds I couldn't explain. I didn't stop until the road leveled out, past the service station, headlights cutting through the heavy forest dark. Even then, the fear didn't leave me. My hands were numb around the steering wheel. My chest ached from adrenaline. I told myself it was over, that I had escaped whatever had been inside the cabin. But deep down, I knew it hadn't ended. Not really. The next morning, I called my uncle. He was fine, oblivious to the events of the night. I didn't explain. I couldn't. No one would believe the footprints, the moving furniture, the mattress weight, or the rocking chair that shifted on its own. Even thinking about the flannel shirt made my stomach twist. I tried to forget, but each night, images replayed, shadows slipping past the window, unseen footsteps pacing the cabin. I didn't return to the cabin for weeks. When I finally did, with daylight and a friend this time, everything seemed normal. The floorboards creaked in familiar ways. The stove smelled of pine, and the rocking chair sat innocently by the window. No footprints, no signs of disturbance. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was still there, just waiting for the right moment. On the third night back, the forest seemed quieter than it should have been. The cabin, too, was silent. I read, tried to focus on mundane tasks, but the air felt heavier. Around midnight, the faintest scrape came from the porch railing. My heart lurched. My friend slept oblivious. I forced myself to breathe, reminding myself of raccoons, wind, settling wood. But I knew better now. This was deliberate. Someone was testing me. The scrape returned, this time closer to the door. My hand went to the deadbolt automatically. A shadow flickered past the window. I didn't move, barely even breathed. The rocking chair shifted. I could almost hear a slow, deliberate exhale in the quiet of the cabin. My mind raced through explanations. Intruder, animal, ghost, nothing fit. I decided then that the cabin was no longer a place for solitude. Its stillness wasn't peaceful. It was waiting, watching, studying. Every creak, every groan, every shadow had a purpose. I slept in town that night, and every night after, until Uncle Ray returned. Even after Ray came back, I couldn't stay alone in the cabin. Something in those walls remembered me. Something lingered in the shadows, silent and patient. The cabin wasn't haunted in the stories you hear on the news. It was alive in its own way. It listened, it observed, and I could feel it whenever I was near. To this day, I haven't spent a night there alone again. Every time I drive past, I glance at the small structure tucked between the trees. The forest leans in the same way. The silence waits, and I remember how close I came to being watched, how small and helpless I felt. Somewhere in that cabin, in those walls, in the floors and shadows, something still remembers me. And I know if I stayed too long it would show itself again. Slowly, deliberately, just like that first night. I was 24 when my parents left me alone in the house for the weekend. They were heading off to some weekend retreat with friends. A silent forest yoga thing, they called it. Honestly, I didn't mind. The house sat high up on a ridge in the Appalachian woods, the kind of place where the air feels sharp and the forest presses in like it's listening. The gravel road that led up was narrow and winding, carved through trees so dense they almost blocked the sunlight in the afternoon. There was no way someone could stumble upon this house without meaning to. That's what I told myself, at least. The first evening felt normal, too normal. I heated up some leftover pasta and dragged myself to the couch with my laptop. My plan was simple. Scroll through videos until my eyes got heavy enough to force sleep. The house was quiet. So quiet that I thought I could hear every creak of the floorboards, every hum from the refrigerator, every tick of the wall clock. At first I liked it. It was familiar. It reminded me of being a kid, of weekends spent curled up with blankets and books while the world moved outside. Then the motion sensor outside clicked on. A yellow-orange light spilled across the front porch, cutting across the living room windows. I froze, heart thudding. At first I told myself it was just a raccoon or a possum wandering by, maybe a neighbor's cat. But the light didn't shut off. It stayed on for a full minute. My hands tightened on the couch cushions as I crept to the window. Outside, nothing moved. No rustling leaves, no shapes slipping between the trees, no reflective eyes watching me. Just empty darkness stretching down the dirt road. I sank back onto the couch, trying to laugh it off. Then came a new sound. The upstairs hallway light clicked on. That old switch snapped sharply in the stillness, louder than it should have been. My pulse jumped. I froze mid-breath, staring at the ceiling. My parents weren't home. Nobody else was supposed to be here. I made myself move. Step by step, I climbed the stairs, muscles tight, every sense alert. At the top, the hallway was fully lit. The brightness poured down the stairs, glaring against my parents' bedroom door. The house held its breath with me. No wind, no branches scraping the siding. Nothing. I reached out and turned the light off, listening. My heartbeat bounced back against the walls. Downstairs, things had changed again. My laptop, which had been humming softly with a video, paused, was completely dark. I pressed the power button repeatedly. Nothing. The quiet of the house had shifted. It felt heavier now, like it pressed in against my chest. My phone? Dead. The Wi-Fi? Dead. Not a single signal anywhere. I realized then that I was cut off. Completely. Panic didn't come immediately. Instead, a sinking certainty set in. Something was here. Something, or someone, was testing the house. The locks. Me. I checked the front door. The brass deadbolt, scratched and stubborn as always, was halfway turned. I hadn't touched it. Not earlier, not tonight. I twisted it back into place and double-locked it. The back door, same thing. Not where I left it. Whoever it was careful, patient, watching. I took a position at the kitchen table, the only place where I could see both doors at once. Flashlight within reach, my breathing shallow and even. Midnight crept in like a quiet predator. I didn't move. I counted each breath, each tiny scrape or groan of the house, trying to keep my mind from spinning. Then, the porch light flicked on again. I grabbed the flashlight, yanked the door open. The yard was empty. Darkness and distance stretched wide. No shape, no rustle, no flicker of eyes. I slammed the door shut, re-locked it, then froze. The phone rang. We barely used the house phone. The caller ID read, "Out of area." Hesitation clamped my chest. I lifted the receiver. "Hello?" Silence. Nothing. 5 seconds. 10. I hung up, heart hammering. It rang again. Silence. And again. I yanked the cord from the wall. I backed away, thinking of leaving the house altogether. But it was so high up on the ridge, I couldn't drive off safely without first making sure the intruder wasn't outside. That night, I sat at the table, flashlight in hand, every sense straining. Upstairs, A floorboard groaned, too deliberate to be random, too rhythmic. Someone, or something, was moving up there. My stomach tightened. My hands shook. I waited, counting heartbeats. Minutes felt like hours. The porch light clicked off and on again, a slow, deliberate pulse in the darkness. I didn't move. I couldn't. Hours passed. Time felt twisted. Every creak upstairs, every pop from the floorboard sounded like someone pacing, like footsteps hunting their way toward me. I forced myself to breathe evenly, pretending I wasn't panicked, though every fiber of my body screamed to run. I considered leaving even now, but the driveway was long, the dirt road narrow, and the forest pressing in like it had teeth. Then came the back deadbolt. The chair wedged under it squeaked. Someone was testing me, seeing if I was awake, if I was paying attention. I gripped the flashlight tighter, sweat clinging to my palms. I could hear the quiet shift in the house, the way the air itself seemed to thicken. Finally, I bolted. Not carefully, not stealthily. I threw myself toward the front door. The dirt floorboards groaned under my weight, but I didn't care. Keys in the ignition. Engine roared, and I slammed the gas. Gravel spat up behind me. I didn't glance at the house. I couldn't. As I crested the ridge, headlights cutting through the dark, my stomach dropped. Through the trees, I saw the upstairs hallway light still on. I didn't slow. I didn't breathe until I reached the gas station down the road, service flickering back to life. I called my parents immediately. Relief washed over me when I heard their panicked voices, but it didn't erase what I'd felt. I drove them back, even with the sun up, the shadows still long and watching. The house, silent again. The deadbolt, locked. My laptop, where it should be. The porch light, office. The sheriff checked the house, walked the perimeter. Nothing. Footprints. None beyond my own. Whoever, or whatever, had been inside, testing me, was gone. But the house wasn't the same. Every floorboard, every wall, every shadow held the memory of the night. The air carried it like a smell. I never spent another night alone there. Not one. Not even with the doors double locked, the windows bolted, and the flashlight within reach. Something had been in the house. I knew it. I could feel it in the silence, in the stillness, in the way the light flickered, even when no one touched it. And the memory of that quiet, deliberate presence, watching, waiting, stayed with me far longer than the night itself. I was 24 when my parents left for a weekend in Cedar Ridge to help my aunt recover from surgery, and I volunteered to stay behind. The house had always been mine in those moments, a quiet fortress perched deep in the Appalachian foothills. Beyond the last bend in the gravel road, cell service disappeared entirely, and the forest seemed to lean closer with every step you took. At first, the stillness was comforting. I could hear my own thoughts clearly, and the hum of the refrigerator was the only other sound. I set myself up in the living room with my laptop on a makeshift stand, a pile of old magazines at my side, and a bag of chips within reach. Some random videos played quietly in the background. I wanted just enough noise to feel like I wasn't alone. The night was soft at first, almost peaceful. I leaned back, letting the warmth of a blanket wrap around my legs. The clock ticked methodically. The wooden floors groaned occasionally, and I told myself the worst of the night was over. And then I heard it, a subtle crunching, almost imperceptible at first. Leaves under something heavy, slow, deliberate. My heartbeat hitched, and I froze. Maybe it was a deer, or a raccoon. But the rhythm, it repeated, a pacing that didn't belong in the natural cadence of the night. I muted the videos. The world contracted to the house and me. Every creak of the wood, every sigh of the cooling air felt magnified, almost intimate. I edged toward the window, muscles tight. The yard lay quiet under the moonlight, shadows of skeletal trees stretching toward the cabin, but there was nothing to see. My gaze lingered too long before retreating. Then came the porch. One particular board, loose since I was a kid, groaned under a step, an unmistakable protest. But I hadn't moved. I froze, counting my breaths. The groan repeated, a half-beat behind what I would have expected. Someone, or something, was out there, mimicking the house's pulse. I told myself to get water, anything to normalize the moment. Moving slowly, deliberately, I stepped into the kitchen. The faucet clinked. The glass in my hand felt solid and grounding. And then, the scrape, metal against wood. From outside, not random, not natural. It mirrored the sound I'd made, just offset by a heartbeat. My grip tightened until my fingers tingled. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just stood frozen, every nerve alert, every shadow a potential threat. Eventually, I shut off the lights and sank onto the couch, clutching my keys like a lifeline. My pulse drummed louder than the refrigerator's hum, and minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The noises never stopped. Footsteps paced along the porch. The door handle rattled in deliberate jerks, and every sound seemed to anticipate my reaction. I didn't move. I couldn't. I barely breathed. At some point, exhaustion blurred my awareness. My eyelids drooped despite the fear, but I never fully slept. Then came the shift I had been dreading. From the side of the house, slow, deliberate movements. The screen door slid open with a soft, sickening drag. My spine tingled with the realization. Someone was outside. Someone who knew exactly how to manipulate sound, how to keep me frozen with dread. Rational thoughts were useless. The wind, an animal, impossible. My gut screamed otherwise. When the doorknob rattled, I bolted. No careful steps, no measured escape. Across the living room, out the back door, gravel biting at my bare feet. I didn't stop. Not until I was halfway to the truck, lungs burning, heart hammering. The engine roared under my hands, louder than the woods themselves, and I tore down the gravel path, headlights slicing through the shadows. The house disappeared behind me. Even as I sped down the mountain road, every instinct screamed that I was being watched. Something in those trees, just beyond the reach of the headlights, followed me, patient and silent. When I finally reached the main road and flickering cell service, I called my parents, hands shaking uncontrollably. They answered with relief and panic, but I couldn't even explain. Nothing I said would convey the presence I had felt, the calculated, deliberate awareness waiting in my home. I never returned to the house alone again. I tried convincing myself to return a few nights later, telling myself I had overreacted. Maybe it had been a raccoon or a deer, or some drunk hiker, but my instincts screamed otherwise. The house felt wrong in my absence, like it had shifted slightly in my mind, hollowed, waiting. I parked on the gravel road and stepped carefully toward the front door, the forest thick and silent around me. No wind, no birds, no comforting hum of life, just the oppressive stillness I remembered. The porch creaked beneath my feet, every board an accusation. I tested the doorknob, hesitating before turning it. The lock clicked, but the sound felt hollow, like an echo of the lock I trusted before. Inside, the house smelled the same. Old wood, dust, faint traces of my parents' cleaning. But I couldn't relax. My eyes darted to the windows, the corners, the shadows that seemed to pulse with intent. I sat in the living room, trying to read a magazine, hoping the noise of my own activity would anchor me. Minutes passed, or hours. I couldn't tell. Then came the first sign, a single, soft thump from the upstairs hallway. Slow, measured, someone pacing just out of reach. My throat went dry. I wasn't alone. I grabbed a flashlight and edged toward the staircase, each step heavy, deliberate. The upper floor smelled of mildew and old memories. The light cut through the darkness, painting long, twitching shadows along the walls. Footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in. My pulse rattled against my ribs. Then, scraping. Something metal dragged along the wooden floor above me. a slow, torturous rhythm that mirrored the tension in my own body. I froze, chest tight, hands trembling. The rational part of my brain screamed to leave, but curiosity and a darker instinct kept me rooted. I whispered my own name, hoping it might ground me. Nothing, just the scraping, pacing, the deliberate, almost patient waiting above. The staircase groaned under my cautious weight, each creak announcing my presence. I reached the top and shone the flashlight down the hallway. Shadows stretched impossibly long, folding into corners. My parents' old guest rooms sat untouched, doors closed like silent sentinels. The final door, the one at the end of the hall, the one that led to the small attic space, was cracked just enough to let a sliver of light escape. I approached, every nerve on fire. The door didn't move when I nudged it. Inside, the attic smelled faintly of old cedar and dust. Nothing stirred. Then the flashlight caught it. Small scuffs on the floorboards, faint but deliberate. They led to the far corner, where a single wooden chair sat facing the wall, not moved from memory, but slightly off angle. I could see faint drag marks leading up to it, and then I saw the message, scratched into the wall, deep enough to catch the flashlight's beam. "We see you." My stomach turned. Every instinct screamed to flee, but I had to know. Had it been someone breaking in, or something else? I moved closer, the chair creaking under my careful steps. Nothing stirred, no sound except my own ragged breathing. And then I heard it. Soft footsteps descending the stairs. Not heavy, not panicked, purposeful. I pressed my back to the wall, flashlight illuminating the open doorway to the attic. Heart hammering, I watched as a shadow crossed the threshold. A figure, tall, indistinct, just beyond the clarity of the light. Its head turned slowly, and I felt the weight of eyes on me, even though I couldn't see a face clearly. I bolted. Flashlight swung wildly, down the staircase across the living room. I fumbled with the back door lock, hands slick with sweat. Outside, the gravel bit into my feet, but I didn't care. The shadow followed, moving silently, impossibly fast. I didn't dare look back, only ran through the trees until the house disappeared behind me, swallowed by darkness and distance. I collapsed against a tree, trying to catch my breath, shaking uncontrollably. The stillness of the forest pressed in, thick and suffocating. Then I saw the footprints. Not animal, not human exactly. They were too large, too deliberate, leading in a spiral around the clearing where the house sat. And each step seemed to pulse, like it had its own life, circling back toward the cabin as if the house itself had grown legs. I stayed crouched until dawn, too terrified to move. When the first light came, I approached the cabin cautiously. No one was there, no signs of forced entry. The front door hung slightly ajar, as though it had never been locked. I stepped inside, heart thudding in my chest. The scratches in the attic glinted in the morning sun. The chair was back where I remembered it. No drag marks. Nothing was out of place. And yet, I knew. I packed my essentials quickly, left the house in the same silence I had found it in, and didn't look back. I called my parents from the edge of the forest once I reached cell service. Their questions bounced off me. How could I explain the footsteps that mirrored mine? The metal scraping that no one else could have made? The presence in the attic that vanished without trace? I've never stayed there alone again. Every time I pass that bend in the gravel road, I feel it. The house watching, waiting. And I know that one night, if I lingered too long, it might reach out for me again. I never speak of it, never explain. But sometimes at night, I hear a soft scrape at my own front door, and I remember the shadows that watch, patient and deliberate, deep in the Appalachian woods. I had been driving for hours when the narrow dirt road began to wind tighter through the hills. The sky overhead was a bruised gray, low clouds pressing down like a warning. I was heading to a cabin deep in the Appalachian hills, far from any main road, far from anyone I knew. The owner was my friend's uncle, a man who only visited during hunting season, and he had insisted 3 nights alone, he said. I had looked forward to it like a gift. Quiet, no buzzing phones, no interruptions, just the kind of solitude that makes your mind both sharper and slower at the same time. The cabin finally appeared through a break in the trees. It was smaller than I expected, a simple wooden structure with a porch that sagged slightly in the middle. I parked, taking in the smell of damp pine and earth. I had brought groceries, mostly comfort food, and a stack of books I'd been meaning to read. The first night was perfect in its mundane simplicity. I unpacked my things, made a pot of pasta, and carried my bowl to the porch. My bare feet creaked against the rough boards as I sat, book in hand, staring into the darkness beyond the porch light. The sky was a solid gray, no stars visible, and the silence pressed against me until I noticed my own breathing and chewing. It was the kind of quiet that makes ordinary sounds feel enormous. By the time I finished half the book, I yawned hard enough to surprise myself and decided to head inside. The rest of the night passed without incident. I slept deeply, the kind of sleep that feels like a soft sinking into the mattress, undisturbed except by the occasional whistle of wind through the trees. When morning came, sunlight filtered weakly through thin curtains, casting long, faint shadows across the wooden floor. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke, though I hadn't started a fire. Perhaps it was residual from previous occupants, or maybe the hills carried it down from a neighbor's chimney. I brushed my teeth, made a cup of coffee, and let the first day drift by in a comfortable blur. I wandered through the surrounding woods briefly, crunching leaves underfoot, inhaling the wet, earthy smell of decay and moss. Back at the cabin, I made lunch, took a short nap, and watched the sky darken slowly as evening approached. By the second night, something was off. I was curled on the couch with a book, one leg tucked under me, when my phone lit up. It was strange because my phone had no signal since I had turned off the main road. The screen glowed with a single notification. The sender was a series of unrecognizable symbols, and the message itself was one word: upstairs. My stomach sank. There was no upstairs in this cabin, just 2 small bedrooms, a bathroom, a living room, and a kitchen. The only possible reference was a small attic hatch in the hallway ceiling. I set the phone down carefully, my fingers trembling slightly. Rational thoughts raced through me. Glitch, prank, delayed notification, but none of it calmed me. Every time I passed the hallway, my eyes flicked to the hatch. It looked normal, flush to the ceiling, a thin veneer of dust along its edges. But there was a whisper of wrongness, a pressure in the air that felt like a held breath before a storm. I forced myself to stay in the living room, reading, trying to ignore it. The wind creaked through the porch boards, the occasional branch tapping a window. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me, and I drifted into a shallow sleep. Then came the third night. Fear had settled deep into my chest, a steady, gnawing presence. I crawled out of bed early, flashlight in hand, sweeping every corner, checking windows, doors, and locks. My heart thumped hard when I reached the hallway. The hatch looked the same, wood panel, cobweb in the corner, but somehow I knew it wasn't the same. I tried to distract myself, made dinner, repeated simple routines, but nothing felt normal. It started small, a glass on the counter, half full, condensation dripping slowly down the sides. I had not touched it. My hand shook as I dumped and scrubbed it, muttering to myself, convincing my brain that it was nothing. When I returned minutes later, it was back, filled again. A chill ran through me, and then I saw it, the hatch. In the corner of my vision it was slightly open, just enough to cast a crooked shadow across the floor. My chest tightened, my hands froze. I didn't want to approach, didn't want to acknowledge it, but I couldn't look away either. Panic surged like electricity under my skin. I threw my clothes into a duffel bag, zipped it up with trembling fingers, and left the cabin without looking back. My boots kicked up gravel, my car keys clanging as I fumbled to get into the driver's seat. I drove down the winding road without turning my head once. The hatch and whatever lay behind it burned into my mind. I didn't stop driving until the hills flattened into familiar roads, the kind where streetlights cut through the dark, and the distant hum of cars felt like a bomb. I tried to tell myself it was over, that whatever had been in that cabin was just my imagination running wild. But the unease didn't fade. Every shadow in my apartment, every creak in the floorboards, made my heart skip a beat. Even my own reflection in the mirror seemed wrong, like it was watching me back with a patience I hadn't seen before. Sleep was impossible that night. I lay on the couch with the lights on, listening to the wind rattle the window panes, trying to convince myself I was safe. But somewhere in the back of my mind, that hatch was still slightly open, and the dark shape behind it waited. I imagined it moving, slowly, deliberately, like it had learned patience over decades, maybe centuries. By morning, I was exhausted, but the sense of being watched didn't abate. The following day, I forced myself to go out. I drove aimlessly, tried to drown my thoughts in the noise of the city, coffee shops and crowded streets. I told a few friends about the cabin, though I left out details that sounded too absurd. Messages from nowhere, glasses refilling themselves, a hatch that shouldn't exist. Most of them smiled, half interested, half assuming I was just exaggerating. But I could see the flicker of doubt in their eyes, the hesitation that comes when someone tells a story that makes no sense yet still feels terrifyingly real. That evening, I returned to my apartment, hoping for normalcy. I unpacked my bag from the trip, each item a reminder of the cabin I'd abandoned. When I set the last book on the shelf, my hand froze. The flashlight from the cabin, the one I'd left in the corner of the bedroom, was now on the floor, beam flickering toward the wall. I hadn't brought it back with me. I had left everything behind. My stomach lurched. I wanted to leave, to run again, but my car keys were on the counter. Something held me there, frozen, staring at that flickering light. The shadows it cast twisted across the walls like fingers reaching for me. I backed away, my mind screaming at me to ignore it, but my body refused to move. And then I heard it, a faint creak, the kind a floorboard makes under weight. I wasn't alone. I spent the night in the living room, clutching a kitchen knife, eyes fixed on the door and the corners of the room. Every sound was amplified. The hum of the fridge, the ticking of a clock, the wind rattling the window. I imagined footsteps above me, though there was no second floor. But the attic hatch from the cabin haunted my thoughts. I could feel it in my dreams, just slightly ajar, dark shape behind it, watching, waiting. Days passed, but the sense of being watched only grew. It followed me to work, to the grocery store, to the park where I tried to jog. Shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, objects subtly out of place. My phone buzzed sporadically with notifications from unknown numbers, each message one word: upstairs. I deleted them immediately, but new ones arrived within minutes. Every glance at my ceiling, every attic vent or closet made my stomach twist. One night, unable to bear it, I packed my bag and drove back toward the cabin. The road that had seemed endless before now felt like it pulled me in, like the hills themselves wanted me there. As I neared the clearing, the cabin was exactly as I remembered: dark, still, unwelcoming. The porch sagged, the trees loomed, and the wind whispered through the branches in a way that sounded almost like speech. I hesitated, my hand on the door handle, heart hammering. I wanted answers, but I feared them more. Inside, the cabin was empty, silent, almost untouched, yet I could feel it, the presence, just behind the edges of perception. The attic hatch hung open, just slightly, just enough to cast that crooked shadow. My flashlight flickered, and I felt a breath on the back of my neck, cold, unnatural. I wanted to leave, to run, but curiosity rooted me in place. I approached the hatch, every nerve screaming. I shined the flashlight up into the small, dark space. There was nothing visible, just shadows, the dust motes dancing in the beam, but the air felt alive, charged. A whisper grazed my ear. Upstairs. I stumbled backward, heart racing, and my flashlight clattered to the floor, its beam spinning wildly across the walls. I didn't look back. I ran, down the dirt road, through the hills, until the city lights swallowed me again. Now, weeks later, I still carry that fear with me. I haven't returned to the cabin, and I've tried to convince myself it was all a hallucination, a trick of solitude and fatigue. But sometimes late at night, my phone buzzes. Unknown sender. One word. Upstairs. My apartment feels smaller, the shadows longer, the air heavier, and I can't shake the certainty that whatever waited in that cabin, whatever lingers just out of sight, isn't done with me yet. I was running on empty when my friend offered me the cabin. Months of city life had left me frayed. Sirens in the night, cars honking at all hours, and my upstairs neighbor who sounded like he was dragging furniture at midnight. My head felt like a browser with too many tabs open, and sleep was a stranger. When he mentioned his remote cabin in the Appalachian hills, tucked so deep in the forest you couldn't even get a signal, I jumped at the chance. Solitude, silence, trees. Just the thought made my chest unclench. The directions were almost folkloric. Drive past the gas station that only sells RC Cola. Keep going past the truck buried in weeds, left at the mailbox shaped like a beehive. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was low, brushing the treetops with gold. The road had shifted from pavement to gravel, to a winding dirt trail that pressed against the car like a living thing. I hadn't seen another vehicle for hours. The cabin itself was exactly as described. 2 rooms, a sloping porch, and a stack of wood neatly arranged by the side. It sagged a little, like it had been breathing in silence for decades. Inside, the smell of cedar and old books greeted me. The pantry was stocked with dry goods, a basket of perfect apples on the counter, and a thermos of black tea. It was cozy, comforting, the kind of place that made your brain sigh in relief. The first night passed quietly. I made a small fire in the stove, curled up under an old quilt, and let the quiet sink into my bones. Sleep came easily, but at some point I woke to a sound I couldn't place. Click, metallic, soft, deliberate, like a latch being tested. I froze, heart hammering, listening. Nothing followed. No footsteps, no whispers. Just silence thicker than the darkness outside. I told myself it was the stove settling, or the cabin shifting. Old wood did that, didn't it? Morning light brought a sense of calm, but that calm didn't last. As I poured my coffee, I noticed the back door slightly ajar. Just a crack, enough to let in a cold draft. I was certain I'd locked it. My hands went to the bolt reflexively, pressed against the door, waiting for a rational explanation. But there wasn't one. I made breakfast, read a few chapters from my book, and even napped on the porch swing, trying to convince myself it had been a mistake. Night came, and the unease returned, sharper this time. I checked every lock multiple times, wedged a kitchen chair beneath the back door handle, and placed the fireplace poker within reach. I slept in clothes, socks pulled tight, heart already halfway in fight-or-flight mode. Around midnight, a thud echoed through the cabin. I sat up, eyes wide, gripped tight on the poker. The bedroom door hadn't moved, but the sound came from beneath, soft and deliberate, like weight pressing against the floorboards. The noise persisted, a slow, methodical rhythm circling the cabin. Sometimes it paused, long enough to make me wonder if I'd imagined it, then started again. My pulse raced, and I barely breathed, waiting for something that never fully appeared. By dawn, exhaustion and fear had left me hollow. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, circling the cabin. That's when I saw the footprints. Small, misshapen, impossibly wide toes, and oddly angled heels. They didn't match any human or animal I knew. 6 prints led to the back door, and none led away. Panic surged. I packed frantically, everything thrown into my bag in chaos. I didn't fold a single item, dropped my toothbrush in the sink, and didn't go back for it. The drive back to the nearest town was a blur, dirt road ruts forgotten, my hands gripping the wheel until they ached. I called my friend as soon as I had signal. He answered casually. "I'm done," I said, voice tight. "I'm not staying another night out there." There was a long pause. Then he said, "Yeah, some people don't take well to being that far back in the woods." The quiet acceptance in his voice chilled me more than anything else. Whatever had been in that cabin wasn't human, and it wasn't done with me. Even days later, the memory of the cabin clung to me. Shadows in my apartment seemed darker than usual, and every creak of the floor made me flinch. I kept glancing at the door, expecting it to rattle open, expecting those soft, deliberate steps. I told myself I was safe, that I had escaped, but my mind refused to believe it. I tried to immerse myself in work, in noise, anything to drown out the memories. Yet each faint tap on my window, each unaccounted shadow on the wall, brought my pulse to the edge. I could still hear the thuds, the tapping, the slow rhythm of something circling in the dark. My sleep was fractured, shallow, haunted by glimpses of movement in the corner of my vision. By the third night after fleeing, I could no longer remain in the apartment. I needed closure, some rational explanation, or at least a sense of control. I returned to the outskirts of the forest, driving slowly this time, headlights cutting weakly through the trees. The road wound and twisted, exactly as I remembered, until finally the cabin appeared. It was untouched, eerily normal, but the air around it was thick, almost palpable, pressing against me. I stepped out cautiously, heart hammering, flashlight trembling in my grip. The first thing I noticed was silence. Not peaceful silence, heavy, expectant, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, circling the cabin exactly as before. I froze. My flashlight traced the perimeter. Nothing visible, only shadows that shifted at the edges. I wanted to retreat, to run, but a mixture of fear and curiosity rooted me in place. Inside, the cabin felt alive. Objects seemed to twitch at the edge of vision, small sounds echoing unnaturally. The back door had been closed when I arrived, but now it appeared slightly open. The lock twisted. My chest tightened. Whoever or whatever was here had returned, testing boundaries, learning my habits. I spent hours moving through the cabin, checking every door, every closet, flashlight in hand. Nothing had changed physically, yet the atmosphere was suffocating. And then came the taps. One at a time, windows all around, slow and precise. My breath caught in my throat. The pattern was intentional, almost communicative. The thought made my skin crawl. As night deepened, I barricaded myself in the bedroom, poker across my lap, lights on. The tapping continued, now accompanied by knocks. Heavy, deliberate, knowing exactly where I was. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I could only wait, counting the rhythm in my head, heart pounding as adrenaline flooded my system. Morning brought faint light, and the cabin returned to stillness. The windows showed only smudges where something had leaned close, just at face height. The hatch to the crawl space had its metal latch twisted, not broken, just warped. I packed methodically this time, bag slung over my shoulder, flashlight in hand. I left without looking back. The forest swallowed the cabin behind me, but the presence lingered. Even miles away I could sense it in shadows, in creaks of old wood, in the weight of empty silence. I realized that some places don't just hold memories, they hold intentions, and whatever had claimed that cabin, whatever had learned to move in the dark without being seen, was still out there, patient, deliberate, waiting. I have never returned, and I never will. Even now, in the safety of the city, I carry the weight of knowing that some isolation is not peaceful, some silence is not empty, and some footsteps, soft and precise, can follow you farther than you ever thought possible. When my parents announced they were leaving for a week-long trip out of state, I was thrilled. For the first time in years, I had the house to myself. It wasn't a mansion or anything fancy, just the old family home tucked deep in the Appalachian hills. The gravel driveway stretched like a winding ribbon through dense trees before spilling onto the dusty dirt road that connected to the nearest town. Most people called it remote, but to me, it had always felt like home. Quiet, towering trees, the hush of the forest surrounding every inch. It was comforting, grounding. The first 2 days were exactly as I imagined. Peaceful, uneventful, and perfectly dull. I worked remotely during the day, ate leftovers from the fridge, and settled on the couch at night with movies or books. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the floorboards, the rustle of leaves outside, they were all sounds I had grown up with, sounds that made me feel safe. I didn't mind the isolation. On the contrary, I reveled in it. No interruptions, no obligations, just me in the house. That second night, though, everything changed. I was halfway through an old sci-fi movie when I muted the volume to grab a drink. That's when I heard it, the distinct crunch of gravel outside. 1 step, maybe 2, deliberate, heavy. My chest tightened instantly. I froze, glass in hand, and strained to hear. Another step, another. My pulse quickened, but when I peeked through the blinds, the driveway was empty. I told myself it was probably a raccoon or a deer. Wildlife wandered close around here, closer than most folks realized. Still, a creeping unease settled over me, an itch I couldn't scratch. By the third night, I had convinced myself the sounds were my imagination, yet the sensation of being watched didn't go away. I curled up on the couch with a bowl of noodles. Movie paused when the crunching returned, louder this time, heavier, deliberate. It circled the house. I held my breath, torn between peeking out the window and hiding from whatever it was. The porch light flicked on automatically in my mind, and I hesitated before throwing the switch. Nothing. No car, no figure, just the oppressive darkness of the forest. The trees like silent sentinels. The quiet wasn't comforting anymore. It felt loaded, expectant, as if it had been waiting for me to notice. The fourth night broke me. Around 10 p.m., I was upstairs brushing my teeth when I heard it. The front door handle rattling. Not a faint jiggle, not the wind. It was metal twisting under deliberate pressure. Toothpaste foaming in my mouth. I froze. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I was rooted in place. The deadbolt gleamed, locked in place, yet the sound persisted in my mind long after it stopped. I finished brushing with shaking hands and crept down the hall. Everything appeared normal, but the air was different, thick, tense, alive with unseen weight. Morning light didn't ease my fear. I stepped outside to toss a can in the recycling and froze. The welcome mat, always perfectly aligned with the porch step, was crooked, tilted at an angle that suggested someone had stood there and turned before leaving. I hadn't touched it. My stomach sank. Every shadow in the house seemed to stretch toward me. Every floorboard grown a potential signal of intrusion. I spent the rest of the day double-checking locks, moving chairs to block doors, and keeping every light on. Midnight came, and sleep felt impossible. Then the footsteps returned. Slow, heavy, deliberate, from gravel to dirt, circling the house. I lay in bed, paralyzed, unable to move, too afraid to breathe. Outside my bedroom window, the steps paused, retraced, and disappeared. By morning, I felt hollow, as if someone or something had been inside while I slept, leaving invisible fingerprints on my sanity. I pulled on boots and stepped outside, heart hammering, and saw them. Footprints in the damp soil behind the porch. Not regular hiking boots, not the kind worn by my parents, something else entirely. The tracks led a few paces into the woods and vanished. No continuation, just nothing. By the time night fell, I had barricaded myself in the living room. A heavy chair wedged under the front doorknob, a knife on the table, and every light on. I sat, waiting, mind racing, listening to the forest hold its breath. Then, loud enough to rattle my bones, Something slammed upstairs. I scrambled, knife in hand, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. Every door had been left open, yet one had slammed shut on its own. The guest room. I crept up the stairs, hands slick with sweat, and slowly pressed the door open. The room was empty. No intruder, no shadow. But the bedspread was pulled back, sheets tucked with perfect corners. Neat, surgical. The bed hadn't been touched in months, yet someone, or something, had been there. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, shoved the chair aside, and ran. Headlights pierced the trees as I tore out of the driveway, heart hammering, chest heaving. I didn't stop until I reached the town minutes away, parking in an empty lot to catch my breath. Dawn came slowly, creeping across the sky, but the sense of being followed, of being watched, didn't leave me. I knew the house in the woods was still there, silent, waiting, and whatever had been inside hadn't finished with me. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every rustle, every creak in my apartment sounded like footsteps echoing through the dark woods. I tried to tell myself it was over, that I had escaped the cabin, but my mind refused to believe it. Shadows in corners seemed to shift unnaturally, and every creak of the floor made me jump. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting it to rattle open, half expecting the intruder to appear in the hallway. The weight of being watched pressed down on me, heavy, relentless. By morning, exhaustion had dulled my fear, though it didn't disappear. I tried to distract myself with errands, coffee shops, even the noise of the city, but nothing could erase the feeling that something had followed me, that presence lingering just outside perception. Each time my phone buzzed with an unknown notification, my heart skipped. I stopped looking at the messages after the first one. Upstairs, it had said, though I hadn't understood what it meant then. Now, the word echoed in my mind, like a warning I had failed to heed. I tried to tell friends about the events, but most laughed it off. Probably a raccoon, one said. Or just your imagination, another suggested. I wanted to agree, to convince myself it had been nothing, but I couldn't. Every sound, every shadow reminded me of that week, of the deliberate, slow crunching outside my windows, the footprints that led nowhere. Even in daylight, the memories pressed close, twisting normal objects into potential threats. By the third night after the incident, I could no longer stay in the city apartment. I drove back toward the cabin, against every rational thought. The hills were still dark, still foreboding, but I needed to see, needed to confront whatever had been waiting there. The road wound endlessly, the trees looming on either side like silent spectators. My car headlights barely cut through the darkness, but I pressed on, adrenaline mixing with dread. The cabin appeared as I remembered, quiet, still, a wooden structure swallowed by the forest. My stomach twisted as I stepped out of the car, each footstep sounding louder than normal in the dense quiet. I forced myself to breathe steadily, flashlight in hand, and entered through the front door. The house was empty, untouched, yet it was alive in a way I couldn't explain. The air felt charged, thick, and heavy. Then I heard it, a sound so faint at first I almost missed it. The slow, deliberate crunch of gravel, circling the house as if someone or something was walking right beneath the eaves. I froze, listening, heart hammering. The steps traced the perimeter, careful, patient, before retreating back into the darkness. I shined the flashlight across the yard, the porch, the surrounding trees. Nothing, just shadows that seemed darker than they should have been, shapes that shifted at the edge of the light. I explored the house, every door, every closet, every corner. Nothing appeared disturbed, yet I knew it wasn't empty. The attic hatch in the hallway caught my attention immediately. It had always been closed before, but now it was slightly ajar, just enough to cast a crooked shadow on the floor. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to open it, to see what was inside, but every instinct screamed not to. Whatever had been waiting for me was still here, patient, deliberate, watching. Hours passed, The forest outside silent except for the occasional whisper of wind. I stayed in the living room, flashlight trained on the hallway, knife at the ready. Then, a soft slam echoed from upstairs. My heart leapt. I knew every door in the house, yet one had slammed shut on its own. The guest room. My hands shook as I climbed the stairs, each step a battle between curiosity and terror. I pressed my palm against the door, pushed it open slowly. The room was empty. Nothing had moved, nothing had changed, except the bedspread. It was perfectly made, tucked with precision, yet I knew it hadn't been touched in months. I realized then that whatever had been in this house wasn't human. It didn't follow logic. It didn't need doors or windows to move. It existed in the spaces just beyond perception, where sound, shadow, and instinct merge. I didn't wait any longer. I grabbed my keys, shoved the chair aside, and ran. The trees whipped past the windshield as I tore down the dirt road, adrenaline and terror guiding me. I didn't stop until the hills gave way to the familiar streets of town, my hands gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white, mind racing with images of the cabin, the footprints, the sounds that had pursued me. Weeks later, I still carry the fear. I haven't returned to the cabin, and I try to avoid roads that wind too deep into the hills. Sometimes, in the quiet of my apartment, I hear soft creaks, faint rustling, that reminds me of gravel steps circling my old home. I see shadows move unnaturally in the corner of my eye, and I can't shake the certainty that whatever waited in that house, whatever had learned patience and precision, isn't done with me yet. The thought is a constant weight, a reminder that some places aren't meant to be alone, and some presences aren't meant to be seen.